In the summer of 1776, the American Revolution was not winning. In fact, it was very close to ending. The Continental Army was poorly trained, badly equipped, and already beginning to fall apart. Disease was spreading through its camps. Enlistments were expiring. Desertion was common. Across the water, Britain was assembling the largest expeditionary force it had ever sent overseas. If that force destroyed George Washington's army, the rebellion would collapse. And in August 1776, that moment arrived. On the 22nd of August, 1776, 4,000 British soldiers crossed the Hudson River in 75 flat-bottomed boats. They landed at Gravesend Bay on Long Island. They were greeted not by resistance, but by cheering loyalists. Food, supplies, and crucially, local knowledge flowed freely to the British commanders. This was only the beginning. For nearly 2 months, General William Howe had been waiting off New York, watching as transports and warships arrived in a steady trickle from Britain, Ireland, Germany, and the American colonies themselves. Now his army was complete. By the end of August, Howe commanded nearly 20,000 men. It was the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever assembled, and he was ready to use it. Howe's first objective was clear. American forces were holding a chain of ridges and passes around Brooklyn. If they were destroyed, Long Island would fall, New York City would become indefensible, and the rebellion itself might not survive. Across the river, General George Washington commanded around 20,000 men. On paper, the numbers looked respectable. In reality, they were deeply misleading. A handful of units, such as the 1st Maryland Regiment and the Delaware Blues, were disciplined and reliable. Most were not. Many soldiers lacked proper weapons. Disease swept through the camps. Typhus and dysentery left nearly a quarter of the army sick or absent. Morale was fragile, and Washington knew it. Washington faced an impossible decision. He believed the British landing on Long Island might be a feint, masking a larger attack against Manhattan or the Hudson River. So he did what caution demanded. He held back more than half his army to defend New York City, leaving his troops on Long Island dangerously exposed. Those forces were scattered. 6,000 men under General Israel Putnam held the fortifications around Brooklyn. Another 3,000, commanded by General Sullivan and Sterling, were deployed forward, spread thin across forested hills. They were responsible for guarding 3 main passes through the heights of Guan. There was, however, a 4th pass. It was lightly defended, poorly known, and it would change everything. At dawn on August 27th, 5,000 British troops attacked the American positions head-on. Muskets cracked, cannon thundered, smoke rolled through the trees. For the first time, the Continental Army faced the British in open battle, and at first they held. Then the firing began behind them. As Sullivan shifted troops to reinforce Sterling, he realized the truth too late. Howe had sent 10,000 men through the unguarded Jamaica Pass, swinging them around the American flank. At the same moment, 5,000 Hessian troops surged forward in the center. Their reputation alone was terrifying. American lines collapsed. Men ran for their lives. Only the 1st Maryland and Delaware regiments stood firm. Outnumbered 10 to 1, the Marylanders launched repeated counterattacks to cover the retreat. They were almost annihilated. Watching from Brooklyn, Washington was horrified. Good God, what brave fellows I must this day lose. The defeat was catastrophic. British casualties numbered around 400. American losses exceeded 2,000. Entire units were destroyed. General Sullivan and Sterling were captured. The survivors fled into Brooklyn, trapped against the East River. A direct British assault might have ended the rebellion that day. But Howe hesitated. Fearing another costly frontal assault like Bunker Hill, he chose to dig siege lines instead. That decision saved the revolution. The following day, torrential rain fell on both armies. Washington's position was desperate. Only a steady northeasterly wind prevented the British fleet from sealing off the East River. On the night of August 30th, under cover of darkness and a thick morning fog, Washington made his move. Silently, regiment by regiment, his army crossed the river to Manhattan. No shouting, no panic, no fires left burning. An American officer later wrote that he could recall no retreat more fortunate. Washington escaped. Barely. Howe paused. Believing reconciliation might still be possible, he offered peace terms through a commission authorized by Parliament. Congress refused. New York emptied as civilians fled. Loyalists remained. Washington abandoned the city. When the British struck at Kip's Bay, 4,000 troops landed under the guns of 80 warships. The American defense collapsed instantly. Washington tried to rally his men. They ran past him. In fury, he shouted, "Are these the men with which I am to defend America?" The British entered New York unopposed. Days later, fire swept through the city, destroying nearly a quarter of it as accidental or deliberate. It left thousands homeless as winter approached. The campaign continued. British forces outflanked Washington again at Pell's Point, forcing a retreat to White Plains. Another defeat followed. Desertion soared. Nearly half the army vanished. Washington's leadership came under attack. Even his own officers questioned his judgment. When Fort Washington fell in November, with nearly 3,000 men captured or killed, the situation seemed hopeless. Washington retreated across New Jersey toward the Delaware River. The population was exhausted, apathetic. Thousands accepted British pardons. Even members of Congress swore loyalty to the Crown. As enlistments expired, men simply went home. By December, Washington commanded fewer than 6,000 soldiers. Winter was coming. With everything slipping away, Washington chose to gamble. On Christmas night, 1776, his army would cross the ice-choked Delaware River and strike the Hessian garrison at Trenton. The conditions were brutal. Snow, hail, darkness. Boats scraped through floating ice as men ferried cannons, horses, and supplies across the river. The crossing ran hours behind schedule. 2 supporting columns failed to cross at all. Washington pressed on anyway. The storm, he believed, was his ally. At dawn, American troops emerged from the blizzard. Hessian outposts were driven back into Trenton. Cannons rolled into position at point-blank range. The fighting was brief and violent. Colonel Rall was mortally wounded trying to rally his men. In less than an hour, the battle was over. 1,000 Hessians were killed, wounded, or captured. American losses numbered 5 wounded. For the first time in months, the Continental Army believed again. British forces moved quickly to respond. General Cornwallis marched on Trenton with 8,000 men. Washington slipped away during the night and struck again at Princeton. The fighting was sharp. At a critical moment, Washington rode forward under heavy fire, rallying his men in person. The British broke. Princeton was another American victory. It was not large, it was not decisive, but it changed everything. Washington withdrew to winter quarters at Morristown. His army was battered, exhausted, and still fragile, but it was alive. Trenton and Princeton did not win the war, they prevented it from ending. Foreign powers took notice. In the courts of Europe, Britain's rivals began to see opportunity. What had seemed like a dying rebellion was becoming something else. The American Revolution had survived its darkest hour, and it was no longer just an American war.